In tonight's news edition, fresh efforts to break the impasse in the Middle East peace process and kickstart negotiations based on a two-state solution are needed, says the king to an American Jewish delegation. The United Nations humanitarian chief is in Syria ahead of a UN aid conference aiming to raise $1.5 billion for millions of people made homeless, hungry, and vulnerable. And over 230 people are killed in a nightclub fire in southern Brazil caused by pyrotechnics going wrong, and the death is expected to rise. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. Fresh efforts are needed to break the impasse in the Palestinian-Israeli peace process and kickstart negotiations based on the two-state solution. That was His Majesty's focal message to a visiting American Jewish Committee AJC team on a visit to Jordan. He reiterated that the two-state solution is the only way to bring about comprehensive and just peace in the region. His Majesty urged the parties concerned to step up efforts towards the establishment of an independent and viable Palestinian state on national soil with East Jerusalem as its capital. His Majesty said the upgrade to Palestinian non-member state at the United Nations is an opportunity that must be capitalized on to enhance efforts towards a comprehensive and lasting peace. The king also stressed that the quest for peace cannot succeed without a cessation of all Israeli unilateral actions, including settlement building and attempts to Judaize the holy city of Jerusalem. Foreign Minister Nasser Judeh also met with the U.S. delegation and reviewed with them Jordan's reform efforts, culminating in a parliamentary election on Wednesday. The discussion also dealt with the Arab Spring, the Mideast peace process, as well as the Syrian crisis. Judeh highlighted the growing burden of a growing exodus of Syrian refugees is placing on the kingdom's resources. His Majesty has said the embattled Syrian regime is not likely to fall within weeks, but has the capabilities to remain standing for several months at least. The king was speaking to a discussion session led by CNN's Fareed Zakaria on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in the Swiss resort of Davos. The conversation with Zakaria covered, in addition to the conflict in Syria, Jordan's reform in light of the Arab Spring and a two-state solution to solve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Farah Ajlouni has the details.
While admitting the past year and a half posed many challenges to Jordan and its economy, His Majesty King Abdullah said Jordan took a different approach from other countries and pushed for evolution, not revolution. He said a 56+ turnout in Wednesday's parliamentary election, along with the highest number of people registered to run for the House seats, was way beyond anybody's expectations. But the challenge now, he said, is creating a party culture.
In my country, 90% of the people are still adverse of being aligned to political parties. So although we've had this wonderful parliament outcome of 56% plus, way beyond, I think, anybody's expectations, the challenge now, and I see in Jordan specifically, the hard work for us is actually creating that political party culture where people, the word is hizb in Arabic, and for Jordanians to be part of a hizb is still instinctively something wrong. So the challenge that we have over the next 4 years is actually the hard work. I think the easiest part of Arab Spring is over the past year and a half is behind us. Today, the challenge from today in creating this parliament is trying to create parties with political party platforms, doctrines. What does it mean for you to stand on health issues, education, services, taxes? That's going to be the real challenge.
When asked what would His Majesty like to see happen in Syria, especially that Jordan is now host to more than 300,000 Syrian refugees, the king warned against a division in Syria and said those who believe the president's days are numbered do not know the reality on the ground.
The challenge that we have, that the longer this conflict goes on, the more the country will implode. And so for the first time, again, there's talk of, is there going to be a fragmentation of Syria, the breakup into different smaller states, which I think would be catastrophic and something that we would be reeling from for decades to come. But the longer it goes on, the nastier it gets, the more complicated it gets. But at the same time, anybody who's saying that Bashar's regime has got weeks to live really doesn't know the reality on the ground. They still have capability, so I give them a strong showing, at least for the first half of 2013.
On Mideast peace, again His Majesty said the only option to go is a two-state solution.
Knowing that you've got now a second-term president in the United States, are being a bit more realistic on how they deal with the coming phase, because really this is their last chance the next 4 years. And the question to Israelis also, I mean, if I can throw it back, is if there's no two-state solution, then the only other alternative is the one-state solution, which I think scares Israelis more, because if they don't invest in a two-state solution, which is the only way that I think they will be able to come out of this crisis for the long-term stability of Israel.
In his speech to the forum, His Majesty had advised against the let's wait and see approach regarding the post-Arab Spring, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the flow of investment to countries where dust has settled. Farah Ajlouni for the News at 10.
And over to Syria, where the escalating refugee crisis is pushing international organizations to step up efforts in aid of the displaced. The United Nations humanitarian chief, Valerie Amos, is now in Syria ahead of a UN aid conference, which convenes in Kuwait on Wednesday, aiming to raise $1.5 billion for millions of people who are homeless, hungry, and vulnerable by the 22-month-old conflict. Amos met senior Syrian officials, including Foreign Minister Walid Muallim and Minister of Labor and Social Affairs Jassim Zakaria. Earlier today, Amos traveled to meet some displaced Syrians sheltered in the suburb of Basra to learn firsthand about their plight. On Wednesday, Amos told the World Economic Forum in Davos there are 650,000 refugees who have fled the country and millions are affected inside Syria. She said the Syrians were paying a terrible price for the failure of world powers to resolve the conflict. In Jerusalem, meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his country must prepare to face regional threats, including chemical arms transfer in nearby Syria. Netanyahu was speaking at the start of a cabinet meeting in Jerusalem after his win in last week's elections. He held a meeting of security chiefs to discuss the state of Syria's suspected chemical weapon.
It is necessary to look at our surroundings, both at what is happening with Iran and its proxies, and what is happening in other arenas, lethal weaponry in Syria, which is steadily breaking up. The Middle East is not awaiting for the outcome of elections, and it is not stopping while the Israeli government is assembled.
On the ground in Syria, amateur videos showed an airstrike in the Manbij neighborhood in Aleppo, where explosions and heavy smoke were seen rising as people ran for cover. Another video showed shelling in the Sultaniya district of Hims, and elsewhere, shelling and smoke were reported in the Salma area of Latakia Governorate. There were also clashes between rebels and government forces in southwest Damascus, forcing the closure of the main highway to the southern town of Dir'a. And in Damascus, the two sides fought around a railway station in the southwestern district of Qadam. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said jets and army artillery also struck targets in rebel strongholds to the east and south of the capital, where fierce clashes erupted. Over to Egypt, and 4 people were shot dead and hundreds were injured in Port Said during the funeral of protesters killed yesterday. Military tanks and personnel have been deployed on the streets of the city after 33 people were killed in yesterday's riots, part of a wave of violence against President Mohamed Morsi. It was the worst violence of the last few days in Egypt when protesters erupted following a court verdict sentencing 21 people to death for their role in a stadium. Opponents of President Mohamed Morsi have also taken to the streets across the countries, accusing him and his Islamist allies of betraying the uprising and overthrow of Hosni Mubarak. We get more on the violence in this report.
Protesters run from security forces and tear gas and into Tahrir Square. It's the 4th day of clashes in Cairo since protests marking Egypt's 2011 revolution began Thursday evening. Dozens have died and hundreds have been wounded nationwide. Stone throwing, volleys of noxious gas, and even live fire have become familiar over 2 years of sporadic unrest. The latest violence and mounting death toll are challenging President Mohamed Morsi and his Islamist allies, whom opponents accuse of betraying the uprising that overthrew Hosni Mubarak. Military forces also deployed in the northern city of Port Said Sunday, following the deaths of at least 30 people in clashes with police. Residents were protesting a court verdict that sentenced 21 people, most from the coastal city, to death over a football riot last year. There have also been reports of gunshots amid a funeral procession for the victims of yesterday's protests.
President Morsi was to address Egyptians as his opponents call for more protests in the coming days. Yesterday, Egypt's National Defense Council, headed by Morsi, condemned street violence and called for national dialogue to resolve political differences. The council said it could also consider declaring a state of emergency or a curfew in areas of violence if needed. Back here at home, the Queen Rania Al Abdullah Hospital for Children at the King Hussein Medical Center got a royal visit from its patron. Her Majesty called on the hospital, where she toured the facility and checked on children receiving medical care. The hospital, the only specialty pediatric surgery institution in Jordan, was inaugurated by His Majesty the King in February 2010 to provide high-quality pediatric medicine and surgery services. It also aims at being a center of excellence in the region for the medical and educational services it provides to medical students, interns, residents, and fellows in training. The hospital attends to some 700 patients daily, including some from neighboring countries who receive medical care in 22 medical specialties. A nightclub disaster in southern Brazil has left 232 people killed, and the president calling on the people to stand together in the face of the tragedy. The deaths occurred when a nightclub went on fire after a band's pyrotechnic show went wrong and fleeing patrons were unable to find the emergency exits. There were about 500 people at the club, and those who died were either asphyxiated or trampled. President Dilma Rousseff cut short a visit to Chile to return home following the blaze.
Ou seja, foi muito dificultado o acesso a porta de saída. Não tinha, né?
Não tinha uma outra porta de saída, uma saída de emergência, por exemplo. Era a mesma porta que entrou, a mesma porta que saiu, não tinha uma lateral. Isso a gente nota na imagem.
The Pentagon lifted a long-time ban on women serving in frontline combat positions, taking a historic step towards gender equality in the U.S. military. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Martin Dempsey signed an order at a Pentagon news conference changing the rule that prevented women from serving in direct combat jobs. The move could open more than 200,000 positions to American women and expand opportunities for career advancement. But acceptance into the newly opened jobs is not assured and will be based on gender-neutral performance standards. U.S. President Barack Obama expressed strong support for the new policy, as did civilian and military leaders from different services.
Professionally today and in the future, I don't think the new policy change will affect me personally. By trade, I'm a chemical operations specialist. However, I do think that it will open up more job opportunities for females in the future.
In Washington, the senator leading the charge to revive a U.S. assault weapons ban conceded that winning Senate passage will be tough. The Senator Dianna Feinstein, who introduced legislation on Thursday to ban military-style assault weapons, is hoping it will be brought up for a vote. No major gun control legislation has made it through Congress in 2 decades in the face of opposition from the National Rifle Association and its gun rights allies. Yesterday, one of many planned marches to protest against lack of gun control in the U.S. took place in Washington, including residents of Newtown, Connecticut, the site of a mass school shooting last month. Here's more in this report.
In the wake of several recent public shootings, gun control proponents march in Washington, D.C. Among them, residents of Newtown, Connecticut, where a shooter killed 26 people, mostly children, at an elementary school last month.
I've watched the news and other tragedies, and shame on me for just sitting there and being upset and not deciding it was time to change. I've always said, oh, it's so horrible that they weren't able to get to that individual and help them before that seemed like the answer to their pain, to go out and tear apart a community. And now it happened in my backyard. It's time. It's got to change.
The group 1 Million Moms for Gun Control co-sponsored about a dozen marches across the country Saturday. Last week, gun rights supporters also organized rallies against firearms control measures proposed in response to the Connecticut tragedy. One mother was grateful her son survived the Sandy Hook Elementary shooting.
I would challenge every gun owner and pro-gun person in this country to stand with me against gun violence. This is not about taking away your guns. This is not about taking away the Second Amendment. I am a firm believer in the Second Amendment.
President Barack Obama wants to revive a ban on military-style assault weapons and put mandatory background checks in place for all gun buyers. But any steps to tighten gun control often face opposition in the U.S. from Second Amendment supporters.
Hundreds of people crowded the banks of Venice's canals to watch the aquatic evening show, which kicked off the annual Venice Carnival. St. Mark's Square became a circus of elaborate costumes, while the entire canal-threaded city erupted with music, dancing, and late-night celebrations. The event culminates in a masked parade in which participants don cloaks and theatrical masks to cavort around the beautiful city. The carnival will last until the 12th of next month. Novak Djokovic became the first man to win 3 successive Australian Open titles in the professional era when he beat third seed Andy Murray. The Serb managed to win as the Briton suffered from blisters on his right foot and problems at the top of his left hamstring. Both players produced superb service games throughout the match, but a break in the 8th game of the third set propelled Djokovic to the brink of the title after the pair had shared tie breaks in the first 2 sets. Djokovic then capitalized on flagging Murray, breaking early in the 4th set and then holding on to clinch the 6-7, 7-6, 6-3, 6-2 win for the 4th time. We stay in Australia, where Dutch cyclist Tom Salacter won the overall title at the Tour Down Under today, giving him his first major victory. 17 seconds later, Spaniard Javier Moreno came in second, while Olympic gold medalist Geraint Thomas took third place. And finally, for a quick look at the weather. Unstable weather conditions continue to affect the kingdom tonight, creating partly cloudy skies with a chance for rain in the southern and eastern regions. Winds will be northeasterly to northwesterly light to moderate. Similar weather conditions prevail tomorrow as the kingdom comes under the effect of a cold front, bringing a drop in temperatures and rain accompanied by thunder and hail. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect partly cloudy skies with a chance for rain, while winds will be northerly moderate to brisk and seas slightly choppy. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. Fresh efforts to break the impasse in the Middle East peace process and kickstart negotiations based on a two-state solution are needed, says the King to an American Jewish delegation. The United Nations humanitarian chief is in Syria ahead of a UN aid conference aiming to raise $1.5 billion for millions of people made homeless, hungry, and vulnerable. And over 230 people are killed in a nightclub fire in southern Brazil caused by pyrotechnics going wrong, and the death is expected to rise. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.